There we go.
There we go. So I'm going to invite us just to breathe a little bit into summer. Um, when Ben asked me to do this opening practice, a poem from um, a poet, Yi Young Lee, came to mind. And and if you don't know him, he's a really interesting man. He was born in 1947 in Jakarta, Indonesia, and his family traveled through 5 different countries before they landed in the United States. He was a personal, his father was a personal physician and needed to escape China. So they traveled through Hong Kong, Macau, and Japan, and they settled in the United States when he was 7. And I read this poem, it's called From Blossoms. And I read it because I'm very, um, it's important to me that this is a collaboration. It's important to me that we work together, as Ben says, and that we create things together, and that we don't see ourselves just merely as sharing information, but in fact supporting each other. And for me, there's great abundance in all of that. So this poem, as we read it, I also read it knowing that there are great fires going on across our lands. I read it knowing that COVID is still ravaging across this world. And it's hard sometimes to feel abundant when we're living in so many questions. But I read it knowing that there are times in our lives when we just have to taste the abundance and sweetness of a peach and really delight in that moment. So I invite you to take a deep breath and listen to the words of Young Lee. From Blossoms. From Blossoms comes this brown paper bag of peaches we bought from the boy at the bend in the road where we turned toward the signs painted peaches. From laden boughs, from hands, from sweet fellowship in the bins comes nectar at the roadside. Succulent peaches we devour, dusty skin and all, comes the familiar dust of summer, dust we eat. Oh, to take what love inside, to carry within us an orchard, to eat not only the skin, but the shade, not only the sugar, but the days, to hold the fruit in our hands, adore it, then bite into the round jubilance of a peach. There are days we live as if death were nowhere in the background, from joy to joy to joy, from wing to wing, from blossom to blossom, to impossible blossom, to sweet, impossible blossom. Young Lee from Blossoms. For me, one of the things about this collaboration is that there are lots of blossoms. There's lots of possibilities. And this actually is a photo of a branch of a peach tree in my backyard. What's important to know about this tree is that the former owner, who lived here 20 years, swore it was a pear tree. It had never blossomed in 20 years. And now this year it's blossoming. And one of the things I'm supposed to do is to take half those peaches off. So some of them will get big and others will be left behind. And I can't bring myself to do this. And I know that's not the right way to farm this. However, I think as a collaboration, one of the things we need to do is to let some of these peaches grow and to see how they grow themselves. And in time, we'll learn which ones we need to prune, but we don't know all of that yet. So I bring all those questions to you as we open a conversation about abundance and about sweetness and about tasting the dust and about pruning peach blossoms, and to realize what goodness comes from a blossom.
We are in such capable hands, Jean. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like the, I'm going to have to prune some of these and I don't want to. Too much goodness.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to start with a little overview of our blossoms that we have going, and kind of the last 3 years of the RCC for folks who maybe don't know that history or aren't sure where we're headed. And some of it is that there are new blossoms all the time, and it's okay to not know where we're headed. Impossible blossoms might be just around the corner for us. So if that sounds right to you, I think that's where I'd like to go. Knowing that this is just kind of setting a platform for us to continue a conversation that'll be a little more personal and get to know each other in just a couple minutes, but I want to kind of set that ground line of where we've come from. I think for some of us, COVID has been such a lightning strike that it's hard for us to think before. And RCC didn't come about because of COVID. It was happening years before. It was an idea that retreat centers are very important and they need each other, but we're not sure how or what they need. And so in 2018, the first few centers got together and said, what are the questions we can ask? What does this sector mean? Where are we coming from? And out of those conversations grew this collaboration, which is continuing and which suddenly served a much broader purpose during COVID, as we were all trying to meet the same challenges in very different ways at very different centers. When you know a retreat center, you know one retreat center. We're all very different. So I wanted to make sure that you know where to find, for example, our green paper, which has just been updated in the last few weeks. And so I'm going to put it in the chat. This is the previous version. So this will get updated. It'll be my task to update it on our website, but I'll put it in the chat there. And I wanted to just share on my screen the theory of change that's at the very bottom of the green paper. So if you follow the link that's in the chat and scroll all the way down, you'll see this image here. And this was what guided us through 2018, 2019. And we published this in January of 2020, right before COVID. So we were looking at retreat centers as these, that's what RC stands for, diverse retreat centers and natural allies of retreat centers. And we uphold these shared values. We started articulating them a little differently as we went along, but here they're listed as intentionally designed places, the wholeness of inner and outer life, and this idea of national parks for the soul, that there's a place that retreat centers hold for us that other spaces don't hold. And so we were starting from there, moving into this middle phase with this circle of kind of feeding into itself, a cyclical cycle, and slowly communities of congruence. That's still, I think, where we are, kind of right in here in this theory of change, but still, even now after COVID, moving towards what is a 21st century retreat center? What does that mean? What role do we have to play? That's still coming together. We still know we want to be connected, resilient, inclusive, life rafts on turbulent waters. So this theory of change still stands true. I think we've updated it some. And I think if you take away all the words and you just look at these 4 images here, this comes from network weaving, network theory. And I wanted to share with you kind of where that is sourced from, because I think this is really helpful. If we're talking about a healthy network, there are stages of network development. And me being the network weaver and holding those knitting needles and saying, this is where the blossoms are and this is what you should prune, and kind of holding that centerpiece, that's just one step. That's kind of this second phase, the hub and spoke. And really the point is to move past that into self-organizing smaller groups, which we're starting to do. Folks are starting to connect with each other without me ever knowing it or being involved, and building their own ideas and projects together, and it's taking shape. to get to system shifting, we just need more of that and more interconnection and sharing back of where we're headed. So this is really helpful for me as I do the work of assessing how we're doing, where we're going, what we're headed into. And I wanted to share one other image here that I think shows it a little differently. I learned through images. I wanted to share this, using Emergence to take social innovation to scale. So you think of networks, they can be kind of flat and dry, kind of transactional, kind of goal-oriented and short-sighted, but they're meaningful because they're a starting point. And I think we can be a network, but we can also become a community of practice, or many small communities of practice, stage 2, where there's all these things going on, which is what we've been doing, what we are doing at RCC, between centers, between networks, and even between retreat center type organizations and other organizations that are sort of allied in movements and other sides of the field. And slowly, as that takes shape, we can move on to this larger kind of systems change scale. But a lot of that is about these kinds of conversations like we're having today. What are the connections that we don't know are already here present in the room that we can build on with each other? So I wanted to share that that's some of the background, where we're coming from and what motivates us, and that there are a few things that sit at the center still. I wanted to share those too, just our core values, which are on our website and which we come back to quite often. Those are here. So this is on our About page. The power of place and space being one of our main core values. And we've articulated it a little differently. It's always been a little challenge. Do urban centers fit in with the power of place and space? Do very small centers or very large centers? And so there's this idea that even a virtual gathering can become a sacred space, that there's power in the way that that space is held. Intentional design being a key element there. Also acknowledging that all places and spaces bear the weight of history and disrupting patterns of exploitation and separation by designing for equity and wholeness with deep attention to markers of intersecting identity. The interplay of inner and outer work, that's what's going on inside, is just as important as what's going on outside. And in fact, they're inseparable, that both are dependent upon each other. We feel like that's essential to the work of retreat centers. We're not just giving massages, but we're also not just doing protests, that we actually need both. We can't do one without the other. There needs to be space for the body to heal and space for our spiritual connections to heal. And then third, a commitment to universal flourishing. And I think all of these weave into each other, that we've separated them enough to say that they're separate, but really they're also overlapped, that we're a part of a larger whole, and we're working to reimagine our work and our stake in the healing of the whole, and that's part of the work of retreat centers. This is what brings us together. This is what gets me fired up about my job. Wherever human patterns create suffering, RCC members commit to repair and renewal of relationship. We've been talking a lot about relationship with the land, relationship with other cultures that may not be familiar to our center, relationship with ourselves and with our staff, relationship with ecosystems, all those interlocking pieces. Repair and renewal of those relationships so that the earth and all people can be free to live into regenerative and equitable futures. So those are what bring us to the table together, knowing that a lot of that is shared regardless of our different traditions, our different communities that our centers have grown out of or have connected with over the years, or even the reasons why we might come to this conversation together. Those things are kind of in the conversation for all of us. And so how can we amplify each other's work? How can we find a center where we overlap, a question that we share that we want to pursue together? That's kind of what the RCC exists for, is to help us find those things and move toward them together. With that background being given, I wanted to take a little time to talk about the questions we're holding as we all phone in from our busy days in the high season of retreats and camps. What is the question that's pricking you this week, that's holding you, holding your attention, and where are you feeling called to move in terms of your center or in terms of your work at your center, your programming, the way your organization is taking shape right now? Many of us have moved into hybrid programming. Many of us are struggling to hire back staff. I mean, all these smaller problems and very large vision problems of we're going into 2022. What has changed that might be a permanent change? I'd love to hear what's on your heart and mind. So we can do this kind of popcorn style. And if you'd like to pipe up, and then if you'd like to ask someone else that you've had a conversation with recently to chip in, if there's some of that kind of cross intersections already happening, feel free to let those rip too. And then we'll kind of listen for themes, and we'll see if there's maybe a few things that we can split off into breakout rooms and discuss with sort of a focal topic group. Or there may be something that rises to the top that we can just continue with as a large group. We'll see how that pans out. So I'll open up the floor there.
Usually like the sound of crickets, but not online. I'll go. My name is Janina, and I'm here on behalf of the Osage Forest of Peace today, located on about 40 acres of wooded area west of Tulsa, Oklahoma, in a town called Sand Springs. Really, there's too many to name, to be honest, Ben. So I'm just grateful to be here and to hear what's already being discussed, and then to start to see alignment. I'd like to share just two names of other people that are kind of here if I'm here, and that would be Macrina and Michaela. So if you hear me mention those two names, those are currently our co-executive team. One is a voluntary board member. The other is a voluntary staff member. So we've gone to very skeleton staff. And so I just want to name that in terms of confidentiality. If you're going to mention things, I notice we're being recorded, but if it's okay with you all, I also represent those two people.
Then I bring two things. One is thank you for that review of where we've been and the road we've been on. I am continually asking myself these days the question of what difference does it make that we call ourselves a collaboration versus a network? And what door does that open up? And what are the differences between those two things? And what you showed was really interesting. It was this movement from based on a network. And is that also the movement of a collaboration, or are those different? So I'd love to have a conversation about that. And Janina, I'd love to also have a conversation about skeleton staff and creative models with that. And what we can do to support each other when we have such small staffs, and what gifts we might be able to offer to each other.
I have a question about what do you do when you lose your space? So just in the last 2 weeks, the Ursuline Sisters have decided to keep closed and to deconstruct the retreat center that I direct here, Mount St. Joseph Conference and Retreat Center. And the building that I'm in right now was built in 1874. And it was with reviewing of the building became a real concern that the bricks in the foundation were crumbling. So we have about 50 rooms. We've just had to tell in the last couple of weeks that, like, the hosted groups that we would bring here, that we're going to close. This is a really sad time. So we're going through the grieving. Maybe any of you are grieving in different ways of the different ministries that might have changed or closed or come to an end in different ways that you're doing things. And the sisters here will be visioning how they can move forward with the spirituality center. How do you have a retreat center ministry without a center?
Jump in here. My name is Yolanda Ramirez. I'm program specialist with the Grand Rapids Dominicans. And if anything I can tell you all, it's so difficult and challenging is don't let go of hope. Our retreat center has been non-existent in a physical space for quite some time now, and we've managed to keep the mission a lot alive. We've gone virtual. There is different, components to that, but it is very much a possibility. It's challenging, especially as Janina was talking about minimal staff, but it is doable. I am very appreciative of the RCC because, when we talk about collaboration and what that might mean, Jean, we're able to collaborate with other people, but have a different outreach. So, oh goodness, it's been rough. I can't say that it's going to be a walk in the park because it won't be, and it hasn't been, but you just have to believe that your mission and the good that you want to do to your community is going to be bigger than the obstacles that are going to come your way. And know that you're not the only one going through that at this present time. So if I can be of any help to you, I'm here.
Thank you. That's a hopeful word. Thank you. Yolanda, what is the center, or what is the name of your organization?
Dominican Center at Marywood. We're a ministry of the Grand Rapids Dominicans.
Thank you.
And formation programs and spirituality, we've been very successful bringing those into the online platform. So if there's any conversations that we might want to follow up on, I'm here.
Thank you.
Marianne, I would also say it's been my personal experience to visit a property where the building was being torn down that had once housed hundreds of nuns and was not sustainable and had to reach that painful grieving. And it was a shock to my system to view that
Yeah.
power
Yeah.
coming down. And so I feel that viscerally when you say you're in grief. So you're not alone. We know what you're going through a little, and I want to offer that I'm here to connect you with other folks who have been through it and are finding other ways to provide, to reach their mission.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I haven't gone through the process that Isabel was referring to. This is Francisco from Pendle Hill. But as I was listening, Jean, at the beginning, at the dilemma about making the necessary decision of what peaches to prune, and what peaches to leave on the tree, prompted within me the idea about thinking about my own process here at Pendle Hill during this challenging time. The many things and the people that we needed to let it go, because we were not in a financial situation that was sustainable for the retreat center in a ethical and moral way to maintain our friends here. And at the same time, the curiosity of exploring new ways in a environment where so many things were unknown. And when I hold those questions, I think that I can relate with what Isabel was saying about the grieving. You know, I can tell you with in confidence here that after closing campus on March 20, and after saying goodbye to so many of my colleagues in June, July 20, you know, I found myself crying in my office because I didn't have the time to process all of that. You know, there was no time. We were so, the pressure within us was so in front of us that discernment in a communal way and in a personal way was going at a speed that I think that we haven't seen, at least during my time here, this in another time. So for me, and I know that one of my predecessors participated in the RCC, Jen Carson, before, but for me, being able to have a group of colleagues that I can share my pain and my happiness as we all are trying to learn together how to continue having a vibrant present as a retreat center that welcome people with their own challenges and with whatever they have in their backpack is for me a blessing. And I try to make it, you know, as much as I can. I try to be in the meeting. I enjoy the exercise and the practices that we have shared in the past. And I really celebrate the expansion of communication that we are having as we try to reach to each other beyond these monthly meetings and bi-weekly meetings. So these are the things that I hold in my heart as when I think about RCC.
I must confess at this point, I'm feeling slightly embarrassed. I work at a Jesuit retreat house and just on the outskirts of Detroit. We have had to close twice, short term. But right now we are finishing up 24 retreatants who have been here for up to 8 days doing individually directed retreats. We have a retreat coming this weekend for married couples. I think we're up to 36 individuals. We've been able to continue pretty successfully to do a lot of on-site, on-campus connections and activities. We've added staff rather than have to cut it. Our newest hire is someone who's going to be managing all of our IT, our Zoom, our connections, all of that. So in that sense, it's a blessed experience for us. But I think my point of discomfort is recognizing that this really is one of those Copernicus moments. Up to now, Manresa, the retreat house, was like the source and summit. Everybody came to Manresa. The grounds are gorgeous. The facilities are terrific. Hospitality is wonderful. But is that enough? Is Manresa the center of the universe? And I'm becoming more and more convinced that no, it's not. No, it's not. How do we, and especially me, since I'm responsible for programming and formation, say, no, it's not fair, and I use Jedi language, it's not just that those people who live 200 miles away or 2,000 miles away somehow don't have access to what we can do and what we can be and what we can offer. So for me, the challenge is becoming more and more and more how to go beyond 38 lovely acres. So how do we do Zoom? How do we do off campus? Because we still have a campus. We have a gorgeous place. But how can we take this gift of spirituality where it's not, but people still hunger and thirst? So for me, that's Copernicus, you know. We used to believe the earth was the center of the universe. Darn it if it wasn't the sun and all the drama that caused. Well, I feel pretty similar to that in terms of this retreat house. We're not the center of the universe. There's something else the center. And how do we move that in new ways and directions?
I think back to a conversation quite some months ago when we talked about retreat centers being more than the brick and mortar. Retreat centers being more than that physical space that, you know, I mean, I think it's a blessing to have a place and be able to call something home. But I think that our energy has to, collaborative energy has to be stronger than the physical space. You know, we always used to think as, I should say, I always used to think of it as, well, we're the place that, you know, people know us for this or might know us for that. But going back to what you all mentioned earlier about pruning and staff cuts and all of that, you know, it's like when all of that other stuff is taken down, like, who are you as a center? You know, what could we be offering? Where does our vision line up with somebody else's vision? Where can we unite and bring presenters or talks or programming, and how do we both benefit from it? I think that, and I understand that it might be a difficult topic to talk about collaboration, but collaboration back when there was a physical space to now that we're not limited by that space can look completely different. And I think there are things that obviously need to be discussed. There's the financial aspects of what a collaboration looks like, but if the financial piece didn't come until later on, what does the dreaming look like? And I think we're limiting ourselves with what our dreams or our goals might be, because we're more focused on the problem at hand right now rather than looking forward and reinventing.
Thank you so much, Yolanda. What you said really spoke to my spirit and my soul. I'm in transition in a lot of ways personally in my own growth. And similar things have come up about, it's one thing to have a center, it's another thing to be a center. And so one of the questions that's coming up for me is, how am I showing up as a center? What is the quality of the retreat within me? How am I a retreat center every time I interact with someone? Regardless of whether it's just hi in the grocery store, or whether I'm actually working with someone who has come to me dealing with life crisis. And I mean, I do this day to day sessions with people who are in life crisis. And for me, it's becoming clearer and clearer that the center has to be from within. And really knowing that that is what manifests out beyond form, beyond how we have concepts and constructs and definitions. And it really changes everything. It goes beyond shifting perception. And it just feels like so many people that I've talked to, there's this cleaving, there's this shedding in various different ways. It looks different for each person. And so I'm just wondering, how all of this is unfolding, allowing us to literally go to the next level. To not only self-heal, but emerge beyond what we previously conceived or defined or understood ourselves individually and collectively.
If I may add to that, most of you here know who was our director at Dominican Center, Margarita Solis. And I have to share with her because every now and then I say, oh, I'm channeling you, Margarita. She's no longer with us, but I often think about the programming that we do to try to be as, we always talked about it being rooted, being true to what the Dominican order was. We talked about it being relevant. So who needs us? And why do they need us? And I think, and please don't take that in a negative way. I'm not saying that we're, almighty and the world revolves around us. I'm not saying that. What I mean is, what are the needs of the community? Put the selfishness aside, the thinking about what's right or what's wrong. How are we relevant? And then how can we be responsive? So there are very many different things and very many different needs within each one of our communities, and nobody knows our communities better than we know them. So I think about programming in that way. And when you talk about spirituality, I mean, if anybody's been challenged by their time and difficultness and hardship and all of that, that's all of us right now. I mean, aside from us, doing this for our work or job or whatnot, we've all struggled, I feel, on a personal level. So we always say, what speaks to you may speak to others. And that's just something that I always sit with as I'm thinking about doing programming for our center. Oh my gosh, and I mean, my mind is just going, but I'm gonna stop there.
Perhaps reflecting on the same points from different language. One of the things that, or a theme or two themes that have come up in the course of this conversation today has been for me, and it also speaks from the experience that we have here at our retreat center, where as a director of the center, having to balance or wrestle with the different offerings that we have, hosted groups versus programmed retreats versus individual retreats, and having to maintain that balance. And in the course of our conversation today, it's helped me come back to the point of the difference between maintaining the institution and maintaining the mission, and being able to make sure that the institutional points don't outweigh the mission points, and to not get, the experience is, as we've reopened, the hosted groups have dominated the schedule, which is a very practical reality that pays the bills and maintains the institution. But I feel the tug of, how do we make sure that the mission doesn't become lost in the practicalities, right? Or even to gloss it over and say, as long as they're coming here, they're getting exposed to what we stand for, without having the intentionality of the mission maintained.
Tim, thank you for verbalizing all of my thoughts and more, and then some.
Thank you for being the spark to help me articulate it that way.
I just want to tack on to what I said earlier. I am the founder and director for the Nature Studies Conservatory, and we have only been online. We are still in the process of finding our physical home, so we're housed online at this time.
Other folks want to jump in? Anybody who hasn't spoken, who maybe is holding something they'd like to share with the group, I invite you to chip it in, whatever it might be.
I'll just say hello from High Hope in Texas. This is my second call with the group, but like Janina, I'm also holding space for Christina, our founder, and someone who makes me feel very plain spoken, if you've heard her talk. And we call ourselves a center for retreat more than a retreat center. We've never had the group housing. We have different houses, so people have been coming. And I also want to thank you for highlighting the hosted group and retreat groups, because now we're moving from And we've offered people escape from the city and onto the land. And now that we may be able to bring people together, how can we better do our mission too? So just more of a listener today, and appreciate everybody sharing what they're going through.
I did realize there's some context in our space that I'm certainly curious to put out there if anyone else has gone through, or Ben, if you know of others. 40 years ago, we were started as a monastery. And so there was a clear lineage of a particular faith tradition from a particular institution. 10 years ago, we shifted to an interspiritual model where the different individuals who may live or work together are not necessarily from the same faith tradition. And what we've noticed in really the last couple of years through different intergenerational conversations is that transition didn't truly happen within the organization, that there were missed communications, misunderstandings. And so a donor base, which still identifies with a strong past legacy, with the staff, new or returning or old, who are often surprised by the presentation of one particular faith community on site in different ways. And so I'm curious if anyone has had its evolutions or transitions of the faith system that they represent. And what comes with that then is a lot of financial implication when you don't have a particular denominational lineage or particular faith lineage. There's a need for a different financial model. So I realize I'm speaking a lot of like the fiscal realities because we are facing a timeline in our situation with the need for some answers. So I appreciate so much the heart-centered space of the mission and vision, and we are very passionate and rooted in that space, but with a timeline.
Janina, thanks for sharing that. So Kirkridge has been around since 1942. It's never been related to a denomination, which has enabled us to do some edgy things. However, it's always been identified as Christian until recently when we switched over to multi-faith, and that was a hard switch. And we did lose donors, and we did lose former board members who are no longer interested. And it's taken longer than I had hoped to sort of form a new identity of being multi-faith, people of faith and no faith. And it has been finding, okay, so we're never on solid ground here. We stay a lot at the bottom of the creek, but we keep bouncing along. So that's the good news. And it's taken a long time, which is to change who hears your message of welcome, and who can trust your message of welcome, and who can trust they really can walk with and beside you. And in that will then come donations from the strangest places. And it's one of the reasons I believe so strongly in collaboration, because it's important that we support one another as we in our own small ways try and change this world to be more inclusive. So I think Ben would agree with me that whatever we could do as a part of the RCC to support you and support others in having these difficult conversations around physical space and around changing direction or roles or widening your circle, any of those conversations, I think what's one of the great things we can do together and figure out how to support one another.
I guess for me, it's also the reminder that the different experiences of the various retreat centers can be very informative and helpful to our individual places. Like Janina, as you had described that, I mean, that's not what we're experiencing here right now, but it could certainly be our experience down the road. Here at Spirit Center, we're associated with a Benedictine monastery of nuns, and the community is aging. And while it's not imminent, the future both of the monastic community, but then the repercussions that has for our institution here as Spirit Center, we can't ignore the fact that we're tied to the monastery, and the implications of changes there affect us here. And how does that alignment continue going forward in a way, it's part of our identity. So it's not a matter of cutting it loose, but at the same time, recognizing, like you're further along in the timeline, and recognizing that the mission, again, is bigger than the community or, the single faith denomination, and how to wrestle with those two realities and the tensions. So for me, it's the opportunity to learn from centers like yours and the experiences of others here along those different timelines and those different experiences. Like Anne is probably closer to my experience, but others, like we've already heard, of having to close because the building can't be sustained anymore, and the community has its own interests that need to be considered. Those are all things that I'm not experiencing right now, but I know they're there, that have to be dealt with sooner or later. So the sharing and the collaboration that goes on here will certainly benefit my situation for sure, speaking personally and, with self-interest in mind.
I wonder if this might be a good time to split and have some deeper conversations with each other if there's some stuff that's rising here. And I will just say in response to those last maybe 3 or 4 speakers that yes, I've had many conversations with people who have been further along on that kind of journey and trying to figure out what communities are really most invested in where we are right now, and what communities have we maybe mistakenly alienated, or we're not sure how we're connected, and maybe there's some miscommunication. I think we've also seen that what's happening for many Catholic centers with the buildings and this physical space not being viable, that is also happening for Episcopals and for Lutherans and for other folks too. It's not just Catholics. And so the idea of how does the mission outlive the institution is a question that applies across the board. So I love what Dr. Myra said about how can we be retreat centers. That is a good question. And how can we carry that into our work, regardless of what might be possible or not possible in terms of moving our institution forward with the current governance or whatever might be happening. So I'm happy to help each connect with others who might be in a similar spot, and some we can do that right now with going into smaller groups if we'd like. So I'm hearing something that sounds like Catholic groups, but I don't know that that's actually it. So can you help me? Is it that there's maybe something about viability and needing to change how we embody the physical space, or our, shift our reach or shift our focus? Is that more the question, or is there a question about maybe governance or about living out the mission? Where can we split so that we can have something productive that we can talk about in some smaller groups? I'm curious what folks think.
I don't think it's unique to Catholics. I don't necessarily think that that's a dividing.
Okay, good.
This idea of mission being bigger than place seems pretty central, what we're speaking of.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think from my specific context right now and then former work with the Methodist Church, separate from the retreat center model would be the trajectory of a lot of specific faith systems and institutions that are releasing retreat centers as kind of independent organizations. I don't know if this applies in your situations, but what I've seen now in about 2 or 3 other faith institutions is they can no longer sustain these quote external ministries. And so they're transitioning to become their own independent nonprofit organizations, which may or may not mean funding then comes from different areas, but a donor base, a participant base that may or may not still strongly identify with the original association or affiliation. I don't know if that resonates for others.
I am interested in what Janina had mentioned in regards to the nonprofit space, because we are a nonprofit and we purposely chose that structure because of the work that we're doing, but we're also at the same time looking at how we can have a low profit or I think it's called a L3C or something like that, where there's a business component to support our nonprofit, because we know that it's not going to be sufficient just to rely on donors. So within the context of expanding outside of the physical space, but also increasing our reach for helping people, but also receiving help ourselves to help people.
Is there maybe a second conversation, a separate conversation for folks who are just here to listen and maybe want to chat with each other and just kind of touch base, and maybe aren't interested in a larger, organizational transformation conversation? If so, I'm happy to host that group, and I think Jean is happy to host this conversation that we've kind of identified here about how we're shifting. So I'm thinking maybe 2, just split in 2, and we'll go off record and then catch back up here in maybe 20 minutes.
Ben, can people choose, is there a way for us to just choose which group we're going to?
Certainly is.
Oh, you're so good.
And then what are you talking about again?
For my group, it would be just folks who kind of came casually to kind of check in and see what's going on. If those folks want to continue a more casual conversation and get to know each other, I'm happy to host that space separate from a more in-depth conversation about shifting organizational structures and maybe talking about nonprofits and talking about legacy and talking about governance. So if that sounds, I'm going to go to let participant choose room. If that sounds good, I think that's what I'd like to do. Okay.